Hello, my dears. Come in. Take off your shoes. Loosen that scarf. Tuck yourself under a soft blanket. Yes, right there. Make yourself comfortable. The day has been long, hasn't it? Full of errands, emails, noise, and a mind that never stops racing. But now it's your time. Just you, this quiet little corner, and a warm cup of imagination to hold. Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands rest. Feel the gentle hush of the evening pressing against the windows. The soft whisper of night sneaking in through the cracks, brushing your cheeks like a kind, familiar hand. The world can wait, my sweet one. The emails, the traffic, the errands, they can all wait. This moment is yours. I'm here to guide you, softly, slowly, like a grandmother telling you a story you've always wanted to hear but didn't know you needed. No rush, no pressure, only warmth, only quiet laughter hiding behind the folds of your tired eyelids, only the gentle glow of comfort wrapping around your heart. So breathe in and out. Let the day melt like snow in your palms. Let your mind float a little, drift a little. Tonight, we will journey together, not to distant lands or fairy tale castles, but to a cozy little world where your thoughts can rest, your spirit can sigh, and your heart can feel softly, gently. At home. Come closer, dear. Let's begin. The city did not sleep. It only pretended to during the day. It was loud in obvious ways, traffic choking the roads, vendors shouting prices, phones ringing in offices with peeling paint. At night, the noise softened but never disappeared. It became distant, layered, like breathing you weren't supposed to notice. Aaron learned this during the months when he started staying out late, long after his shift at the records office ended and his rented room felt too small to hold his thoughts. He worked as a junior clerk in a government building that smelled permanently of dust and old paper. His job was simple: check forms, stamp dates, file documents that would probably never be opened again. He had once believed this was temporary. Everyone did. Temporary had a way of settling into permanence without asking permission. That night, like many before it, Aaron found himself walking toward the railway station without consciously deciding to. His feet knew the way better than his mind did. The station sat at the edge of the older part of the city, where the buildings leaned slightly inward, as if tired of holding themselves upright. The platform lights flickered, not broken, just old. The kind of yellow light that made everything look softer, sadder, more forgiving. It was nearly midnight. Most people preferred to be home by then. Those who weren't usually had reasons they didn't like to explain. Aaron stood near the edge of platform 3, hands in his coat pockets, watching the tracks stretch into darkness. Trains came and went throughout the night, cargo maintenance, the occasional late commuter, but there was one train he had started noticing a few weeks ago, the midnight one. It was never listed clearly on the electronic board. Sometimes it appeared for a moment, sometimes it didn't. Destination unreadable. Time delayed. Always delayed. Tonight was no different. A low rumble announced its arrival before the headlights appeared. When the train finally slid into the station, it did so quietly, as if trying not to draw attention to itself. The windows glowed dimly, not broken, just intentionally muted, like someone had turned the brightness down. Aaron frowned. He was certain he'd seen this same train before. Same number of compartments, same dull silver exterior, same odd stillness. The doors opened with a soft hiss. A handful of passengers stepped out. A handful stepped in. No one rushed. No one waved. No one checked their phone urgently, the way people usually did when they were late or bored. Their movements were unhurried, deliberate, almost careful. Aaron didn't board. He never did. Not yet. Instead, he drifted toward the tea stall at the far end of the platform. It was run by an older man with a permanently bent posture and eyes that looked sharper than his age suggested. He had been there longer than Aaron could remember. Some people said he never went home. 1 tea, Aaron said. The man poured without asking how much sugar. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the train idle. You notice it again, the tea seller said casually. Aaron froze. Notice what? That one. The man nodded toward the train. You always come on nights it arrives. Aaron let out a small laugh. I come every night. Yes, the man agreed. But you look on these nights. Aaron sipped his tea. It was too hot, but he didn't mind. It's just a train. The man hummed, non-committal. Some trains carry people. Some carry luggage. Some he paused, then shrugged. Some carry decisions. Aaron raised an eyebrow. You say that like you believe it. The tea seller met his gaze. Belief has nothing to do with it. Before Aaron could reply, the train whistle blew soft, almost apologetic. The doors began to close. Aaron turned back just in time to see a woman inside the nearest compartment staring straight ahead, hands folded in her lap. She looked ordinary, tired, like someone who had taught too many lessons or listened to too many excuses. For a brief, unsettling moment, her eyes flicked toward him. He felt exposed. The train pulled away. For a few seconds, the platform felt emptier than it should have. Aaron finished his tea and left. He returned the next night, and the one after that. At first, he told himself it was coincidence. Midnight walks were cheaper than therapy. Watching trains was easier than explaining why he felt restless in a life that looked fine on paper. But patterns have a way of announcing themselves. The train always arrived late. The same few minutes past midnight, the same dim lights, the same silence. Some nights there were more passengers, some nights fewer, but the feeling remained unchanged, heavy, restrained, purposeful. Aaron began overhearing things, not clearly. Never full conversations, just fragments carried on the air when the doors opened. If I had stayed, wasn't brave enough then, thought I had more time. They weren't dramatic. No crying, no raised voices, just confessions delivered softly, like people were tired of holding them in. Once, a man stepping off the train muttered, "Next time," under his breath, though Aaron wasn't sure whether it was a promise or a warning. Another night, a woman laughed quietly and said, "It's strange how you don't miss it until you see it pass." Aaron stopped pretending this meant nothing. Still, he didn't board. Something about the train unsettled him, not fear exactly, but recognition. Like hearing your own thoughts spoken aloud by a stranger at home. His room remained unchanged. Same narrow bed, same stack of unread books, same desk where an old acceptance letter lay folded inside a drawer, untouched for years. He avoided looking at it. On the platform, though, time behaved differently. Minutes stretched, thoughts slowed. He felt less like he was running out of time, and more like time was waiting for him to make a move. One night, the tea seller spoke again. "You won't find answers standing outside," he said, handing Aaron his cup. "I'm not looking for answers." The man smiled faintly. "That's what people say when they're afraid of what the answer might cost." Aaron didn't reply. The train arrived. The doors opened. This time, someone inside laughed, softly, not happily, not sadly, just knowingly. Aaron stepped closer to the edge of the platform, not onto the train, not yet, but closer than before. And somewhere deep inside him, beneath routine and responsibility, and all the reasons he stayed still, something shifted quietly, patiently, like a door unlocking without making a sound. The platform lights flickered, the city breathed, and the night train waited. Aaron boarded the train without ceremony. There was no announcement urging him forward, no dramatic shift in the air. One moment he stood on the platform, hands tucked into his coat, watching the doors breathe open and closed. The next, he stepped inside, as if he had always meant to. The compartment smelled faintly of metal, old fabric, and something warmerty, maybe, or rain soaked into coats long ago. The seats were upholstered in a dull blue that had faded unevenly, like memories worn thin in certain places. The lights above flickered, then steadied, never quite reaching full brightness. 4 other passengers sat scattered across the compartment. No one looked surprised to see him. Aaron hesitated near the door before choosing a seat by the window. Outside, the platform slid past slowly as the train began to move. He waited for the jolt, the sense of acceleration, but it came gently, almost reluctantly, as if the train respected hesitation. Across from him sat a woman in her early 30s, hair tied back loosely, a canvas tote resting against her legs. She wore sensible shoes and a long coat buttoned all the way up, despite the mild weather. Her posture suggested discipline, but her eyes told a different story. Next to her, a man leaned back with one ankle resting on his knee, fingers drumming quietly against his thigh. He had the build of someone who used to train seriously, muscles still there, but softened by time and exhaustion. His jacket bore the faint logo of a ride-hailing service. He looked restless, as if sitting still required effort. Further down, by himself, sat an old man. He wore a dark coat that seemed older than the train itself. His hands rested calmly on a cane, though he didn't appear to need it. His face was lined, but not fragile. His eyes sharp, observant, missing nothing. He gazed forward, not at the window, not at the passengers, just ahead. The doors hissed shut. Silence settled, not awkward, not heavy, just present. The woman spoke first, her voice quiet but steady. "You're new." Aaron blinked. "Is it that obvious?" She smiled faintly. "You still look like you're deciding whether this was a mistake." The man beside her chuckled softly. "That look doesn't go away, it just changes shape." Aaron exhaled, some tension leaving his shoulders. "I'm Aaron, Sarah," the woman said. "I teach history, or I used to enjoy teaching it." "Ben," the man added, "used to enjoy a lot of things." They didn't elaborate. No one asked them to. The train slid through the city, passing familiar street shops, closing their shutters, traffic lights blinking lazily, apartment windows glowing unevenly. Aaron recognized the route. It followed lines he had traveled all his life, yet the view felt altered, stretched, as if the city were being observed rather than used. Time felt different here, not slower exactly, just less demanding. "So," Ben said eventually, breaking the silence, "what brings you?" Aaron considered lying. It would have been easier, Instead, he said, I didn't want to go home. Sarah nodded, as if he'd said something precise. That's usually enough. She looked out the window. I come because this is the only place where no one expects me to be certain. Ben smirked. I come because I already know what happens if I don't. Aaron glanced at him. What happens? Ben shrugged. Nothing. That's the problem. The train passed a school building, dark, now empty playground, gleaming under streetlights. Sarah's gaze lingered. I married someone sensible, she said after a while. Kind, reliable, the sort of man everyone approves of. She paused, fingers tightening slightly around her tote. I don't regret him, she added. I regret how quietly I disappeared. No one rushed to comfort her. No one told her it would be okay. Ben nodded once. I was supposed to go professional, he said. Had scouts watching, coaches calling, and Aaron asked gently, and I got scared, Ben replied. Not of failing, of succeeding, and realizing I didn't know who I was without it. The old man shifted slightly, his cane tapping softly against the floor. Fear is efficient, he said calmly. It saves you from pain by charging interest. Aaron turned toward him. You've been listening. The man smiled. I always am. What's your name? Sarah asked. He shook his head. Names encourage attachment. Ben laughed under his breath. Figures. The train slowed briefly, passing a university gate tall, iron unmistakable. Aaron felt a tightness in his chest. I was accepted once, he said before he could stop himself. Scholarship, abroad. Sarah looked at him. Why didn't you go? He swallowed. I thought staying meant loyalty. And now, she asked, now I wonder if it was fear wearing a better suit. No one contradicted him. The train continued, steady and unhurried. Ben leaned forward, elbows on his knees. It's strange, he said. We don't talk about the lives we're living here. Only the ones we almost did. That's because the almosts still talk back, Sarah replied. The old man nodded approvingly. Aaron felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest, not hope, not regret, but recognition. These people weren't dramatic. They weren't broken. They were simply awake in a way the rest of the city avoided. The train passed a wedding hall under renovation strings of lights unlit, banners half removed. Sarah smiled sadly. I used to imagine my life loudly, she said. Now it whispers. Ben sighed. At least it still speaks. The old man finally looked at Aaron directly. You'll learn, he said, that movement doesn't begin with action. It begins with listening. The train slowed again. For a moment, Aaron wondered if this was his stop, whatever that meant. But the doors stayed closed. The train moved on, and for the first time in a long while, Aaron didn't feel like he was falling behind. He felt like he had arrived somewhere quiet enough to hear himself think. The train did not announce its stops. It slowed, instead subtly, respectfully, like it was giving the city time to recognize itself. Aaron noticed it first when the rhythm beneath his feet changed. The steady hum softened, the metal sighing as though relieved to pause. Outside the window, streetlights appeared closer together, brighter, more intentional. They were approaching something familiar. A university gate emerged from the darkness tall, iron, unmistakable. Its name was etched across the archway in lettering. Aaron once traced with his finger on glossy brochures. The campus beyond it was quiet now. Pathways empty. Buildings standing like patient witnesses to ambition. The train did not stop fully. It lingered. Aaron felt his chest tighten. I know this place, he said quietly. Sarah leaned closer to the glass. Most people do, even if they never went there. The old man nodded. Opportunity does not disappear, he said. It relocates. Aaron remembered the email, the congratulatory tone, the scholarship amount listed neatly, generously. He remembered his mother's silence when he showed her, his father's careful nod, the way everyone tried to sound supportive while hoping he wouldn't go. You can always study here, they had said. Family comes first. He had told himself staying was the mature choice. I folded the letter, Aaron said, surprising himself. Put it in a drawer. Told myself I'd decide later. Ben snorted softly. Later's favorite hobby. The train moved again, the gate slipping out of view. No one regrets failing there, the old man said calmly. They regret never testing themselves against it. The next slowdown came quicker. A factory stood ahead, windows dark, gates chained, signage half-frosted. Once, it had employed half the neighborhood. Aaron remembered men coming home covered in dust, proud despite exhaustion. Ben leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I trained near a place like that, he said. We used to run past it every morning. Told ourselves we'd never end up there. He smiled faintly. Guess life heard that as a challenge. He spoke about injuries that weren't dramatic enough to end his career outright, about missed trials, about choosing something safe when uncertainty demanded commitment. I thought success would trap me, Ben admitted. Turns out, avoiding it did the same. The factory slid past, no alarms, no music, just absence. The train slowed a third time. Fairy lights, sunlit, hung outside a wedding hall under renovation. Banners were half removed, words peeling. The building looked tired but hopeful, like it expected to be loved again. Sarah exhaled slowly. I almost married someone else, she said. Aaron didn't turn. He listened. He wasn't safer, she continued. He wasn't approved of. But I laughed more. I argued more. I felt visible. She paused. Stability felt like adulthood. Love felt reckless. The train crept forward, as if unwilling to interrupt. I don't hate my life, Sarah added quickly. I just wonder who I might have been if I'd allowed myself to be brave when it mattered. The old man tapped his cane lightly. Hesitation, he said, is rarely dramatic. It dresses like responsibility. The city continued unfolding streets. Aaron had walked, corners he'd waited on, shops he'd passed without entering. Everything looked ordinary. That was the cruelest part. Nothing had gone wrong. And yet, Aaron leaned his head back against the seat. Do you ever wish, he asked, that you could go back, not to change things, but just to ask yourself why you stopped? The old man met his gaze. I did, he said. I asked. He didn't have a good answer. Silence followed, not uncomfortable, just heavy with understanding. The train never stopped long enough for them to step off. It never opened the doors. It showed them everything they avoided without offering correction. Memory, not magic. As the city drifted by, Aaron felt something shift, not relief, not regret, but clarity. These moments weren't meant to be fixed. They were meant to be acknowledged. How many almosts do you think people carry? Ben asked quietly. Sarah smiled sadly. Enough to fill a train. Aaron realized that the ache wasn't coming from what he lost, but from finally allowing himself to look at it. The train stopped where it wasn't supposed to. Not at a platform. not near a building, not anywhere that invited certainty. The brakes engaged gently, almost politely, but the sudden stillness was unmistakable. The familiar hum beneath the floor faded, replaced by a silence so complete it felt intentional. Aaron opened his eyes. Outside the window, there was nothing but darkness, punctuated by a few distant streetlights, too far apart, too dim to belong to any known stop. The city felt farther away than it ever had before, even though they were still inside it. Ben was already standing. He hadn't moved abruptly. He had simply risen, as if his body had been preparing for this moment, long before his mind caught up. Wait, shifting subtly from heel to toe, Sarah sat very still. Her fingers were laced together in her lap, knuckles pale. She stared straight ahead, not at the window, not at anyone. Like she was holding something fragile inside herself and feared it might shatter if she looked away. The old man adjusted his grip on the cane. Then the announcement came. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It sounded almost tired. "Passengers," the voice said calmly, "genderless and even, this stop is unplanned. Those who choose to disembark should understand return is not guaranteed." No explanation followed. Instructions. Just that. The silence afterward was heavier than the words. Aaron felt his pulse quicken, not in panic, but in recognition. This wasn't about danger. It was about consequence. Sarah inhaled sharply. "What does that mean?" she asked, though her voice suggested she already understood. The old man answered without looking at her. "It means some exits close behind you." Ben exhaled through his nose. Figures. They waited, as if giving the weight of the announcement time to settle. Aaron's thoughts scattered. He wasn't imagining a new city on the other side of the doors. He wasn't picturing escape or reinvention. What unsettled him was simpler and more frightening. Who would I be if I stepped off? Who would I become if I didn't? The doors hissed open. Cool night air slipped into the compartment, carrying the faint smell of wet concrete and distant rain. Beyond the threshold lay a narrow service path alongside the tracks, lit poorly, leading away into shadows that suggested streets, but offered no guarantees. Ben took one step forward. He paused with his hand resting lightly on the doorframe, knuckles white. "I used to think," he said quietly, not turning around, "that leaving meant freedom." Sarah finally looked at him. And now I know it just means different problems," he replied. "Louder ones." She swallowed. "I keep imagining a version of myself," Sarah said, voice trembling just enough to notice, "who didn't choose safety every time it asked." She stood, not fully, just enough to test it. Aaron watched her, heart heavy. He didn't want to convince her either way. He didn't want the responsibility of influence. The old man cleared his throat. "I left once," he said. They all turned toward him. "I stepped off," he continued calmly. "Different train, different year. Same belief that courage always rewards you." Ben turned fully now. "Did it?" The old man smiled faintly. "It rewarded me with solitude." Sarah frowned. "You regret it?" "No," he said honestly, "but I paid more than I expected. Freedom costs differently when no one is waiting for you on the other side." The words settled slowly. Aaron felt something crack, not break, just loosen. He realized then that the choice wasn't between staying and leaving. It was between avoiding pain and choosing which pain you could live with. Sarah took a step toward the door. Then stopped. Tears filled her eyes, not falling, just present. "I don't want to disappear again," she whispered, "but I don't know how to stay without resenting it." The old man met her gaze. "Resentment grows where honesty is absent," he said gently. Ben let his hand fall from the doorframe. "I think," he said, almost embarrassed, "that I want to try being brave where I already am." He stepped back. The doors remained open. The night waited. Aaron stood slowly. His legs felt steady, not confident, but resolved. He thought of the scholarship letter, the drawer, the years of telling himself he had time. He understood now. This wasn't that moment. This wasn't about escape. This was about acknowledgement. He stayed where he was. Sarah closed her eyes, then sat back down. The doors hissed shut. No applause, no relief, just a quiet, collective understanding. The train began to move again, not immediately, just after a pause long enough to ensure the decision had fully settled into their bones. No one spoke for a while. The mood had changed, not lighter, not heavier, just sharper. Aaron realized something, then something uncomfortable and grounding. Choosing to stay was not passive, it was an action, and it would demand just as much courage as leaving ever could. Outside, the city slowly returned, familiar. Lights, recognizable streets. Inside, none of them were the same. The train slowed for the last time, just as the sky began to change its mind. Night loosened its grip, gradually, not surrendering, just stepping back. The darkness thinned into blue, then into a pale gray that made outlines clearer, but feelings softer. Streetlights blinked off, one by one. Embarrassed to still be awake, Aaron noticed the light. First, it slipped through the windows gently, touching the worn seats, the metal rails, the tired faces inside the compartment. For the first time since he boarded, the train felt ordinary. Less like a confession booth, more like a vehicle, doing what it was always meant to do: deliver people back to themselves. The brakes engaged. This time, the stop felt final. The doors opened onto a familiar platform. Same cracked tiles, same peeling paint, same tea stall at the far end, steam curling upward like a quiet greeting. Morning birds hopped near the tracks, unbothered by whatever revelations had occurred overnight. No announcements followed, no warnings, just arrival. They stood together, briefly, Sarah adjusting her tote, Ben pulling his jacket tighter, the old man gripping his cane as he rose slowly. None of them rushed, none of them lingered unnecessarily. There was no ceremony in leaving. Sarah paused beside Aaron. "I think," she said carefully, "I've been rehearsing honesty for years." He smiled. "Are you finally ready to say it out loud?" She nodded. "Even if my voice shakes." Ben stretched his arms, wincing slightly. "I'm done trying to impress people who aren't watching." "And what will you do instead?" Aaron asked. Ben shrugged. "Help kids who still think effort matters." The old man watched them quietly. "You'll forget details," he said. "That's normal. But don't forget how this felt." "Will we see you again?" Sarah asked. He smiled, unreadable. "If you need to." They stepped off the train. Doors closed behind them. The train waited only long enough to ensure they had turned away. Then it was gone. Not pulling out. Not fading dramatically. Simply absent, as if it had never been there at all. The city resumed its rhythm. Morning traffic began to hum. Shopkeepers lifted shutters. Someone laughed too loudly into a phone call. Life, relentless and familiar, pressed forward. And yet something had shifted. Sarah walked home instead of taking a taxi. She let the quiet stretch between her thoughts. When she reached her apartment, she made tea she didn't drink and sat across from her husband without distractions. "I need to tell you something," she said. Her voice trembled, but it didn't retreat. Ben sat at his kitchen table with a laptop. That took too long to start. He searched local programs, youth centers, places that needed volunteers more than talent. He didn't romanticize it. He didn't expect redemption. He applied anyway. Aaron returned to his rented room and opened the drawer. The letter was still there. He didn't read it again. He didn't need to. Instead, he opened a notebook and began writing lists, timelines, options. Not escape plans, movement plans. When he resigned weeks later, it wasn't dramatic. He thanked his supervisor, gave notice, left with references. He didn't feel brave. He felt honest. That night, the tea seller noticed the platform was quieter. No midnight train arrived, but he smiled anyway. Some journeys weren't meant to repeat. Morning light filled the station, and true growth continued quietly, unnoticed by everyone except those who had finally chosen to listen. Morning did not arrive all at once. It seeped in gradually, like a thought you weren't ready to finish. The darkness loosened its grip on the city in layers first, the sky, then the buildings, then the spaces between them. The station lights dimmed automatically, embarrassed to still be on. A breeze carried the smell of damp concrete and something faintly metallic, the kind of smell that only existed where trains slept. Aaron stood on the platform with his hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee he didn't really need. He'd been awake for hours, not because he was restless, because he no longer was. That in itself still surprised him. The platform looked exactly as it always had, the same cracks in the tiles, the same faded safety line near the edge, the same bench with one loose bolt that wobbled if you sat too far to the left. Nothing about the place suggested transformation, and yet, standing there in the early morning light, Aaron felt the unmistakable difference of someone returning not to a location, but to a version of himself that no longer needed hiding. The board above flickered once, then settled. 6:12 a.m. on time, he exhaled slowly. There was a period, months ago, when that phrase would have unsettled him. On time meant predictable. It meant trapped inside a rhythm he hadn't chosen. It meant watching life move forward without feeling like a participant in it. Now it meant something else. It meant he had somewhere to be. Commuters gathered around him in small, unconscious clusters. A man in a pressed shirt adjusted his tie. With irritation, a woman balanced a tote on one shoulder while whispering into her phone. A student leaned against a pillar, earbuds in, eyes half closed. Everyone looked mildly inconvenienced by existence, and Aaron felt a strange affection for them all. This ordinary irritation, this quiet persistence, was life continuing. He shifted his weight and glanced down the platform. Near the far end, where the shadows still clung stubbornly, someone stood alone. A young man, maybe early 20s, hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, gaze drifting toward the tracks, and then away again, like he was afraid of being caught wanting something. He didn't check the board, didn't check his phone, just stood there, suspended. Aaron recognized the posture immediately. He had stood like that once, night after night, waiting, without admitting he was waiting. The memory didn't hurt anymore. It simply existed. The sound of a train echoed faintly in the distance. Not his, not yet. Just another line waking up. The city clearing its throat. Aaron took a sip of coffee and grimaced. Too bitter. He smiled anyway. Life hadn't softened into something pleasant. It had sharpened into something clear. His days now were fuller, but not louder. He worked with people who expected things from him and trusted him to deliver. He came home tired in a way that felt earned. Some evenings, he still sat on his bed, staring at the wall, unsure of what came next, but he no longer mistook uncertainty for failure. That had been the biggest shift. Not success, not happiness. Permission to be unfinished. The station announcement crackled to life. Listing stops in a voice to practiced to care. Aaron listened anyway. The sound anchored him, reminded him that movement didn't require drama. The young man down the platform took a hesitant step forward, then stopped, looked around, as if searching for confirmation from strangers who were too busy being late to notice him. Aaron considered saying something, not advice, not reassurance, just acknowledgement, but he didn't. Some realizations had to arrive alone. The morning train pulled in with a familiar roar, brakes screeching briefly before settling. Wind rushed past, tugging at coats and loose hair. The doors slid open. People surged forward. Aaron stepped inside with them. No hesitation, no second guessing. The compartment was bright, crowded, unremarkable. He found a place to stand near the door, one hand gripping the rail as the train lurched gently into motion. Through the window, the platform began to move backward. The young man remained where he was. Aaron watched him grow smaller, blurrier, until the curve of the track swallowed him completely. He felt no urge to go back, only a quiet hope that the man would eventually step forward on his own terms, in his own time. The train gained speed. Conversation filled the air. A cough, a laugh, someone complaining about the weather. Life, happening loudly now. Aaron closed his eyes briefly and breathed. Months ago, he would have been thinking about what he hadn't done yet, what he was late to, what version of himself he was failing to become. Now his thoughts were simpler. This is where I am. This is who I am becoming. And for the first time, that felt sufficient. Windows catching first glimmers of day, the hum of tires, the distant bark of a dog, the sharp hiss of an opening shop shutterall, layered together into a soundtrack Aaron hadn't noticed before. He had passed these streets hundreds of times, and yet never heard them, never felt them. He gripped the rail lightly, letting his fingers linger over the metal, tracing the familiar grooves worn smooth by thousands of hands before his. Somehow, that touch grounded him. The mundane solidity of the train beneath him reminded him that life moved forward, whether he watched or not tanned, that he was. At last, part of the movement rather than merely observing, Aaron's thoughts drifted, as they always did now, into the quiet rhythm of months past. He thought of Sarah. He imagined her sitting across from her husband in the small, sunlit apartment, clearing her throat and saying words she had rehearsed for years. He pictured the tremor in her voice, the tiny shake of her hands. He knew she would feel fear, yes, but she would act anyway. That memory, or rather, that projection, made him smile faintly. Then Ben appeared in his mind's eye, coaching a group of children in a small, cramped gym. They were laughing, shouting, learning to push against their own limits. Ben, who had once been consumed by the fear of success, now reveled in the simple, visible growth of others. It was quieter than fame, quieter than glory, but it was meaningful, and it felt alive. Aaron imagined himself in tandem with these two, connected not by grand gestures or sweeping adventures, but by small, deliberate actions. He felt the weight of months of accumulated choices, the resignation, the planning, the slow commitment to honesty settling over him like a familiar coat. The city outside the window began to take shape in a way he had never appreciated before. Narrow alleys appeared cozy instead of confining. Sidewalk cafes, closed at this hour, looked like they could be lived in, full of warmth. A stray cat darted across a street, moving with a confidence that reminded Aaron of something he had lost long ago, the audacity to be present without apology. He thought of the night train, of the halts between stations, the moment that had forced him, Sarah, and Ben into choice. That strange, liminal space had been terrifying then, yet it had brought clarity he would have never found in ordinary hours. The memory did not hurt. It hummed softly in the back of his mind, like a lullaby that only played once in a lifetime. Aaron's attention returned to the present. Commuters shifted around him. Some were talking, others staring at their phones, a few simply swaying gently. With the motion of the train, he realized he had started to notice small details he had ignored before. The way one woman tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, the faint scuff marks on the seat opposite him, the barely audible hum of the train's engine. Life was composed of these tiny things, unnoticed yet essential. He thought again of elsewhere. For years, he had imagined it as a place, a city beyond the horizon, a job that would validate him, a version of himself that had never existed. But now, watching the ordinary city wake beneath the soft glow of morning, he understood the truth. Elsewhere wasn't a location. Elsewhere was the courage to act before life solidified into excuses, to move, even when fear whispered that stillness was safer, to speak, even when silence promised comfort. The thought made him feel lighter. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to think of the future without dread. He didn't see every obstacle. He didn't see a perfectly mapped out life. He only saw the possibility of movement, the permission to grow, to fail, and to try again without collapsing under the weight of regret. The train slowed for a stop. Doors opened, releasing a small crowd. Aaron noticed a young woman linger at the edge of the platform, staring at the train with hesitation. She reminded him of himself months ago, hands in pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, afraid to step into something that demanded courage. He didn't know her name. He didn't need to. He simply watched as she shifted her weight, one foot inching forward. Somewhere in his chest, a quiet warmth spread, not pride, not joy, not hope in the dramatic sense, just recognition. That little step, just existing and moving forward, was enough to matter. The train moved again, and Aaron leaned against the doorframe, watching the city slide by. He remembered Sarah's laughter during their last shared conversation, Ben's soft chuckle as he realized fear had no ownership over him, and the old man's patient words, movement doesn't begin with action. It begins with listening. Aaron realized he had spent months listening to himself, listening to others, listening to the quiet call of life beneath the noise. And now, in the muted light of morning, he felt ready to act. Small actions first. Honest words, measured steps, a life that did not require fireworks or validation to feel significant. The train rattled over a crossing, wheels clanging against steel. A bell rang in the distance. Aaron noticed a pigeon flutter past the window, wings catching the sun. For a fleeting moment, he felt connected to every small thing in the city. Trembling bird, the hum of the engine, the rustling trees that lined the avenue, the commuters moving with purpose, yet unaware of his observation. This was life, quiet, real, imperfect, and enough. Aaron closed his eyes for a second, letting the train's gentle sway carry him. He remembered the long nights of hesitation, the almosts, the choices deferred, the fear that had once felt like a physical weight pressing against his chest. Now that weight had shifted, not disappeared, not conquered, just transformed into clarity. Elsewhere was here. The courage to act was here. The possibility of living fully even in small increments was here. The city unfolded outside the window like a story he had always known but never read. Shopkeepers began opening doors. A soft worry of motors filled the streets. Footsteps echoed against sidewalks damp with dew. The light was pale, not yet golden, but enough to reveal texture. Asphalt glimmered faintly. Brick walls showed cracks and moss. Smoke curled from a distant chimney. Ordinary things illuminated in extraordinary quiet. Aaron's hand rested on the rail, and he let it stay there. No one spoke. No one needed to. The rhythm of movement, of life continuing, was its own conversation. A faint aroma drifted past fresh bread, coffee brewing, wet earth from the nearby park. He noticed it without comment. Noticing was enough. Somewhere, a child laughed. Somewhere else, someone argued softly with a friend on the phone. Somewhere, a door creaked, a lock turned. A day began in all its unpredictable uncertainty. Aaron leaned his forehead lightly against the window. Elsewhere wasn't out there. Elsewhere had always been in the courage to step into the ordinary with presence, to accept life as a series of small, deliberate decisions rather than a single, grand achievement. And for the first time in a long time, he understood that this quiet, imperfectly perfect morning was enough to be home. The city breathed around him, and for the first time, Aaron felt like he could feel its pulse rather than just pass through it. The train rattled over steel crossings, swaying slightly, the faint vibration traveling up through the soles of his shoes, into his bones. Each lurch was grounding, reminding him that he was moving really, moving not running from something, but toward a rhythm he could follow, one measured, deliberate step at a time. He remembered the night train, its silence, the pauses between, stations that demanded honesty. That strange, almost invisible world had felt terrifying then. Each decision he had made since Sarah's honesty, Ben's choice to teach, his own resignation was like a ripple in the water, stretching farther than the immediate moment, touching parts of himself he hadn't dared acknowledge before. Aaron watched people around him, noting small details he never would have noticed before. A mother guided a sleepy child, her hands firm but gentle. A man adjusted the strap of his briefcase with exact precision, expression tense but concentrated. Two friends laughed at a joke that was probably not funny. Their bodies relaxed in a rhythm of shared comfort. Even the janitor, broom in hand, moving in wide, careful arcs, seemed deliberate and meaningful. Everything that had seemed trivial before now mattered in a quiet, essential way. He closed his eyes briefly and let himself drift, letting memories fold over the present. Sarah, her voice trembling as she finally told truths long buried. He could picture it so vividly, the small apartment, the sunlight slicing across the table, her hands wrapping nervously around a cup. The courage it must have taken to speak, even knowing the consequences, made his chest ache with recognition. Ben, the children laughing as they learned, stumbling and rising again under his guidance. The pride he would feel not for accolades or recognition, but for simply helping someone grow. That quiet joy, he realized, was a different kind of light, a different kind of victory. Aaron let his thoughts drift inward, tracing the nearly invisible path he had walked since that night, opening up to himself, daring to plan rather than simply exist. But it had compounded in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. That compounding, gentle as a stream carving rock over years, had begun to shape the person he had always hoped he could become. The train slowed as it approached his station. He could see it now in detail. The familiar platform, the same cracked tiles, the tea stall at the far end, steam rising faintly from a kettle in the soft morning light. And yet he noticed something new, a subtle vibrancy. The city was awake, aware. He realized it had never been asleep. He had simply been blind to its quiet pulse. Aaron inhaled deeply. The smell of wet concrete, faint smoke, and brewed coffee mingled together in a way that was both grounding and intoxicating. A bird fluttered past the window, wings catching the pale sunlight, delicate. That little creature, moving with effortless confidence, reminded him of himself when he had finally decided to act, step by step, despite fear. The doors hissed open. Aaron stepped onto the platform, letting his feet carry him forward. Each step felt significant, not because the world demanded it, but because he had claimed it. He moved slowly, deliberately, noting the way shadows fell differently in morning light, the way even cracked tiles seemed to hold memory. Across the station, a young man lingered, hesitating at the platform's edge. Aaron recognized himself in that figure, the uncertainty, the fear, the suspended possibility. But he no longer felt anxious. He only felt a quiet connection, a knowing that the courage to step forward would come in its own time. The platform was calm, almost reverent. Passengers rushed past, unconcerned with him, as if the city itself had chosen to let him linger, to notice, to breathe. He let himself pause, feeling the warmth of sunlight grazing his shoulders, the distant hum of life continuing around him. Aaron walked toward the tea stall. The old man looked up from behind the counter, eyes crinkling in a subtle smile. Steam rose from the kettle, curling lazily into the morning air. No words passed between them, none were needed. The acknowledgement was enough. He ordered a cup of tea and held it, savoring the weight of it, the warmth, the faint bitterness. He didn't need to rush. Nothing demanded it. The city unfolded before him like a story already written but waiting for him to notice the chapters he had skipped. Aaron let his mind wander through the quiet streets he would walk after leaving the station. Small actions, small decisions, subtle changes, they all counted. He thought of Sarah and Ben again, imagining their quiet growth in parallel with his own. Their courage was a mirror to his. Their choices had already rippled into the world, in ways visible and invisible. The first train of the morning departed, rumbling past, carrying others toward work, toward school, toward obligations and lives they had yet to shape. Aaron didn't envy them. He only observed, aware that everyone was moving in their own rhythm. Everyone navigating fear, hope, hesitation, and choice. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed. Somewhere else, a shopkeeper turned a key in a lock, beginning another day of ordinary labor. Somewhere, a man stepped onto the street, making a choice, small but consequential, that would shape his hours, his life, in ways he could not predict. Aaron sipped his tea. The warmth spread through him, grounding him in the present, connecting him to every quiet, deliberate movement around him. He let the city wash over him, the cracks, the steam, the soft hum of awakening streets. Elsewhere was here. It had always been here. He realized he did not need dramatic change to feel alive. He did not need an escape route or a sudden revelation. He only needed attention, observation, action in the smallest, most deliberate forms. The day was beginning. The city, imperfect and unassuming, continued to hum. The platform, long empty of his nighttime reflections, waited quietly for the next travelers, the next hesitant steps, the next ripples of courage in the ordinary. Aaron raised his cup to the rising sun. A faint smile curved his lips. Elsewhere was not a place. Elsewhere was here. And now he was ready. Aaron lingered on the platform, cup of tea in hand, letting the warmth seep slowly into his palms, into his chest, into the quiet space he had carried with him for months. The morning had fully arrived now. Pale sunlight spilled across the cracked tiles, pooling near the edges of benches and puddles left from overnight rain. Every small detail seemed amplified: the uneven surface of a stone step, the subtle hum of electricity along the tracks, the faint scent of asphalt meeting moisture in the air. He noticed it all because he finally had the space to notice. The young man from earlier was gone. The fleeting shadow of hesitation that had mirrored his own past had dissipated, absorbed into the rhythm of life around him. Aaron didn't feel relief, he felt recognition. That pattern of quiet, solitary courage would repeat itself in many forms, in people who were afraid to move, people who were afraid to act, people who would eventually learn that presence itself was a choice. He wandered slowly down the platform, letting his eyes follow the motion of the city beyond the station. Delivery bikes zipped past, their drivers hunched over handlebars, focused on destinations unknown. A cat darted across a back alley, pausing, only to glance up at the rising sun before vanishing again. Somewhere, a distant train horn reminded the city that time continued to flow, unbroken, indifferent, yet alive. Aaron's thoughts drifted. He thought of Sarah, now taking those tentative steps into honesty, letting conversations unfold with trembling voices and deliberate pauses. He thought of Ben, moving through the chaos of young, ambitious children, discovering joy in their struggle rather than in the applause of strangers. And he thought of the old man, whose words had once seemed cryptic, now echoing clearly in his mind. Movement begins with listening. He realized he had spent months listening, not just to others, but to himself, to the subtle pull of decisions, the quiet warning of fear and the persistent whisper of possibility. He had learned to distinguish between noise and signal, between the urgent pull of distraction and the gentle insistence of meaningful action. That understanding didn't make life easier, it made it truer. The tea had grown lukewarm, and he drank it anyway, savoring the lingering bitterness, the faint hint of herbs that clung to the edges of the cup. Even small sensory experiences carried weight now. The warmth in his hand, the sunlight on his shoulders, the rustle of leaves from a nearby tree. He noticed the slight trembling of his fingers as the train approached in the distance, as though the city itself reminded him that all movement required engagement. No matter how small, a soft gust of wind carried the distant scent of baking bread. A vendor was already setting up a stall near the entrance, the smell of yeast and sugar weaving into the crisp morning air. Aaron inhaled deeply, letting the aroma mingle with the memory of nights spent on empty platforms with conversations he had never had the courage to start. Now, the smell was grounding. It was ordinary, yet it marked the continuity of life, the mundane beauty of living in real time. The train screeched softly as it arrived. Doors opened, releasing another flow of commuters, faces blurred in there. Focus on schedules and routines. He watched them with curiosity rather than impatience. Each face carried unspoken stories, quiet regrets, unfulfilled dreams, small victories, and all of them, like him, moved forward in the delicate tension between fear and courage. Aaron let himself wander toward the edge of the platform. Watching the train doors open and close, he imagined the possibilities in each silent passenger. Hesitation, the almosts, the decisions deferred or embraced. Some would step into opportunities, some would wait. The city was full of both, and both were necessary. Life was a balance of action and inaction, courage and reflection. He thought of the nights on the night train, again not with nostalgia, not with longing, but with understanding. The halts between stations, the suspended time, the confessions. Never dramatized, but deeply felt, they had taught him that choices weren't about adventure or escape. They were about presence, about listening, about moving forward deliberately, even in ordinary moments. Aaron felt the shift fully now, settling into his chest like a warm, steady heartbeat. He was here, fully here, present in a city that hummed, with the lives of countless others, each negotiating fear, hope, and choice in their own way. He did not need to chase elsewhere anymore. Elsewhere had always been an idea, a mirror to what courage could be. Now, courage was here in him, in the rising sun, in the ordinary rhythm of the city waking. He sipped the last of his tea, savoring it with deliberate attention, letting the warmth linger a moment longer. He noticed the subtle way the sunlight reflected off a puddle near the platform edge, the soft shadow of a tree stretching over a cracked wall. Every tiny detail became a testament to life's quiet resilience. The young pigeons near the tracks flapped and scattered, wings brushing the morning air. He watched them, imagining the freedom in small gestures, the simple bravery in movement, the courage it took to leave the familiar for the unknown. It reminded him of himself, of Sarah, of Benal, of them learning in their own ways that life demanded participation. Aaron leaned against the railing, letting the warmth of the sun wash over him. His chest expanded slowly with each breath. He thought about months of careful, small steps, resignations, conversations, decisions, and realized they had culminated not in spectacle, but in presence. The city, ordinary and alive, mirrored that truth. Somewhere in the distance, a child's laughter echoed through the alleyways, sharp and bright. Somewhere else, a delivery man called out, coordinating packages. Somewhere else, a woman adjusted her scarf, noticing the sunlight on her shoulder for the first time that morning. Life moved in layers, moments overlapping yet distinct, carrying with them the quiet weight of being. Aaron smiled, faint and content, realizing that the train, the night, the conversations, the choices, they were all fragments, pieces of a long, subtle arc. And this ordinary, luminous, imperfect morning was the culmination, not an ending, not a finale, but a homecoming. Elsewhere was here, courage was here, presence was here, presence was here. Life, imperfect, ordinary, and unremarkable to an outsider, was magnificent in the awareness he now carried. He let the platform, the city, the people, the birds, the morning, the subtle aroma of bread, the distant hum of movement, all of it wash over him. He did not need more. He had arrived, and he would remain.